Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Niles. I'm the Urban Ag Liaison for the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association. I'd like to thank you for joining us for doing chicken composting with Wyatt Johnson from the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. This webinar has been funded under a conservation collaboration agreement between the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association to promote sustainable agriculture practices and environmental stewardship. Its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the USDA or NRCS. Come Wyatt.
Hello, Melissa, and hello, everyone. So my name is Wyatt Johnson, and I work for the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, and I'm one of our two small-scale and urban ag soil health technicians. So along with, talking to the large-scale producers, we also specialize in talking to the small-scale producers and with animals in there and backyard gardeners and all that good stuff. And today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about on our series on Specialty Producers Association's chicken series here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how to compost your chicken manure. So with that, basically right away, composting, manure is very similar to composting anything else. Usually with your manure, it's a little bit higher in nitrogen, so then you need to supplement that with some more carbons or browns, as we might call them. So without further ado, let's get into the little presentation here. Okay, yep, we're going to do that. All right, now I should be able to see my screen, and oh, there's my presentation. Just kidding. All right, I have had some computer issues, but we should be good to go here. All right, here we are, composting at home, with chicken manure. So composting is essentially, decomposition of organisms, plants specifically in this case. So, here's a couple pictures of some compost bins. The 3-bin system is what I would recommend you do. So again, Soil Health Coalition, there's my contact information at the bottom there. We have recently redone our emails, so it's now wyatt@sdsoil.org instead of the soil health email. And there's my phone number at the bottom there too, if you wish to reach me. All right, so I can't start a presentation without talking to you guys about the 5 principles of soil health. We want to keep our soil covered, limit disturbance, reduce tillage, keep living roots in the soil, have a diverse mix of plants and different plant species growing in one area at a time, and then integrating livestock, which brings us into, composting, which is part of integrating the livestock, livestock out on the prairie or in the natural system, just nature will break down that waste that they produce and return those nutrients back to the soil to help those plants grow. However, with compost system, we can take animals that have been confined and take the waste from them and make that more accessible and available to our plants by composting them. So why would you compost? Well, it promotes healthy soil with compost that adds those nutrients back to the soil that you'd otherwise have to add or return to the soil with artificial ingredients such as, inorganic fertilizer and stuff. So, and this also will help you reduce your waste and your greenhouse gas emissions. It helps you build organic matter in the soil because compost is essentially 100% organic matter, when you break it down. It's all about, the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle. That's all plays a part in composting. And that's basically what you're working with when you are composting. You want to improve your water infiltration and storage, which means it helps the water soak in faster and retains the water in the soil for longer, making it available for the plants. So, and then it also helps increase crop growth and productivity, and it reduces your inputs on your fertilizers that you have to purchase and apply to your garden, or on a larger scale, it could be out in your fields too. It also helps reduce erosion because it soaks up the water instead of moves as easily with it, and then helps buffer the pH in your soil. So, what is composting? It's basically science. Well, everything is science to a degree. So it's basically the decomposition of organic materials by using bacteria, fungi, worms, and insects, and the other things that help break down things. Things rot. Decomposition is basically rotting, and that's what we're trying to aid here and maybe speed up the process so we can turn that really rich chicken manure, which is too rich for the plants, and kind of make it into a form that the plants can then use. So you want to, supply these, the bacteria and fungi and little critters down there. You want to supply them with the food and water that they need and some oxygen. We'll get into composting a little bit more specifically with how you can, you pile it up and kind of let it ferment, and then you want to turn it, which adds air to it, and that kind of speeds up the process. Well, it doesn't it really speeds up the process significantly. And it's not complicated, anything will rot. If you put some fresh fruit in your refrigerator for a while and you don't eat it, after a while, even being below 40 degrees, it will start breaking down, So getting moldy and stuff, and then you throw it outside, and then it really speeds up getting rotten and breaking down. All right. So, and there's a few different methods of composting, and we'll try to cover some of those today. But when we're focusing on compost and manure specifically, typically if you have a sizable number of chickens, a sizable chicken operation, I should say, you're going to have a sizable amount of manure you need to compost. So when we get into compost piles, a compost pile is a mix of all the organic materials that you put in there, and you compose it of browns and greens. And basically, more professionally, we'd say those are carbons and nitrogen sources, right? So your browns are the ones that are high in carbon. Think like trees or, a tree trunk or wood. That's very high in carbon. It's a lot of lignin, undigestible material. And that holds, all the carbon that doesn't degrade as much. And then the greens are the nitrogens. So they say for every 3 browns you add, you can add 1 green. So when we're talking chicken manure, chicken manure is very high in nitrogen. We want to supplement our chicken manure compost pile with a lot of sawdust or straw or dead leaves or cardboard or things, things like that of that nature. So, and one thing about, in the chicken barn, my chicken barn, we always use straw or wood shavings as bedding. So we'll talk about that. Another way to do that in chicken barn, instead of just cleaning out your chicken barn and then you add a layer of straw or wood shavings to the bottom right away, and then just let the chicken manure stack on top of that until you clean it. There's another way called the deep litter method, whereas you start out with your initial bedding, and then the chickens defecate on it. Then you add another layer of bedding on top of that. Then they defecate a little bit more, and then you add some more, and kind of make a lasagna out of the bedding and the chicken manure in there. So then when you clean it out, there's already a significant amount of carbon added in there with the chicken manure to help when you haul it outside and put it in your compost pile. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about the browns here. We talked about your dead leaves and your straw, shredded paper, like newspaper. Don't use magazines. You don't want any of that like waxy film paper. Corn stalks, shredded wood, dried grass clippings, things like that. Now, we're going to talk about the greens. Fruit and vegetable scraps, green grass clippings, manure, which is what we're emphasizing on here today, and then garden waste. Now, you might notice we have grass clippings listed twice. Dried grass clippings, if they dry out in the sun and turn brown, you can call they're high in carbon and don't have much nitrogen left in them because they've been bleached out by the sun. However, the green ones, the fresh green wet ones, like if you bag your lawn, you mow it and you got the bagger on, those green grass clippings, those would be considered a high nitrogen source for your compost pile. All right. And now, of course, we talked about what to add. We want to talk about things what not to add. Now, granted, most of these things will also decompose, but these might have some adverse effects just in the maintenance of your pile and the having to reside near your compost pile. So you want to stay away from dairy products, fats, greases, and oils, and meat, because those can attract rodents and lots of insects that we don't want. Like, think of flies. Flies have been pretty bad around my place this summer here. So, and then just these other things, they can attract all them as well. And you don't want to be adding your diseased plants because, well, I guess if it gets hot enough over 140 degrees, it should kill the diseases, but that's not necessarily the case. So if you have like a squash leaf that has, fungus growing on it, maybe don't add that to your compost pile because it'll, those spores will be in there to add when you spread it in your garden for the next year. It could infect all of your squash and pumpkin viney plants. So, and you really don't want to add your pet feces because pets are monogastrics, just like us and pigs. And they can carry, parasites. Thank you. Yeah, they can carry parasites. So we want to try to avoid them. Also, last time I've cleaned out a litter box, it stinks pretty bad, but that's okay. Sometimes chicken manure stinks pretty bad too, as you guys are aware. So you want to stay away from your pet feces, unless, of course, it's a rabbit or guinea pig. some of those vegetarian type animals, those herbivorous animals, herbivorous pets you have, you can add those feces in and they won't be as damaging to your pile or to your health. And you want to try to avoid mature weeds, putting those in the pile, because if they have seeds, those seeds might not die in the compost process, and then you'll be just spreading more weed seeds out on your garden again the next following growing season, right? And you really want to try to stay away with things that have been sprayed with herbicides or fungicides or pesticides, because while those herbicides and pesticides, they all have they'll have a half-life, and those will break down to where they might not kill a plant, but they can still curl the leaves. And some of our garden plants are very touchy, very sensitive, I should say, to some of those pesticides and herbicides. So you want to try to stay away from things like that. Things have been treated with herbicides. Even like if you have a lawn and you use like a weed and feed, it adds a little bit of nitrogen to your lawn, but it also has some chemical in there that kills the broadleaf plants. Most of the plants you grow in your garden are broadleaf plants, so you wouldn't want to bag your clippings from your grass lawn that has been treated with a weed and feed type of application. Okay, then obviously plastic and food wrappers. If you're going to compost for 400 years, the plastic might break down, but let's be honest, none of us are probably going to make it that long, so we try to avoid our plastic and our food wrappers, right? So talking about our pile, our compost pile, you want to have 3 parts of browns, the high carbon substances, to every part of greens, your green grass clippings, or more specifically, your chicken manure, right? And you want to have a sizable pile so that way it can heat up in the middle, basically ferment in the middle, and that'll speed up the decomposition process. So we recommend a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3/4 of a foot size and height, and it'll make heat to heat up that pile and decompose it in the middle while still letting air reach around the sides of it too, and you want to kind of stack your layers of your browns and your greens, and so that way it kind of helps. They come in contact with each other, and the carbon can soak up the nitrogen from your green materials that you're adding to it. Granted, in this case, chicken manure is typically brown, but we're calling that a green because it's high in nitrogen, right? So you want to have your straw right next to your chicken manure, or your wood shavings next to your chicken manure as close as you can, or mixed in even better, so that way they can soak up and work together to break down all that manure and the carbon you have in there, right? And then of course you're gonna want to turn your pile once in a while. You stack it up for a while, and then you're gonna take a potato fork or a pitchfork or a shovel and go out there and turn it. Basically scoop it from one pile and start another pile right next to it. That'll help to add air to it, aerate it. And then when you're done, you want it to be moist. You don't want it to be soaking wet, but you want it to kind of feel like, if you have a sponge and it's full of water and you squeeze it in your hand and you squeeze most of the water out, the consistency of that sponge after you've wrung the water out of it should be about what your compost feels like. You want it evenly moist out there. And like this last couple of days in Fort Pierre, we've got upwards of 5 inches of rain. So my compost pile is not covered right now because it was pretty dry when I started it. I know I wasn't following my own advice, kind of had to get it going, and I didn't have time to run the hose over to it and soak it down while I was making it. But it's rained about 5 inches here. So if I had a properly moist pile of compost in my backyard, it would have gotten too wet these last couple of days here. So you might want to cover it with a tarp or something. Now, I know compost isn't the most pretty thing to look at in your garden operation or out in your backyard, so a tarp over that is not going to make it much better, in my opinion. But if you want to make a good pile of compost out of that chicken manure, you're probably going to want to put a tarp over it. All right, types of composting. So you've got the continuous composting, where you add it throughout the year, and typically you want to use a 3-bin system, like we have illustrated in the top right corner here of your screen. See, you can make them pretty simply out of pallets. One thing that concerns me about the pallets is the slots in between the boards. The smaller materials, especially once it's decomposed, can fall through them, and it'll be tangled up in there a little bit. So you might want to line those with a little bit of fabric, like landscaping fabric. Some people, I've seen them use chicken wire before too. That'll help hold it in. But yeah, you also still want to have some air circulating around the edges too, right? So basically what you do with the 3-bin system is you only put fresh stuff in the one compartment. And then as that compartment gets full, and you turn it every once in a while, you open up the little pallet gate on it, you turn it over with the pitchfork. That'll help break it down a little bit faster. And then once that one starts getting full, you start pitching it into the second bin. And then you turn that second bin while it's in there. And then when that breaks down even further, then you tip it into the third bin. And by the time it's done being stirred in the third bin, it should be ready to apply to your garden, right? So that's on the continuous composting method over there, right? Our other one we like to talk about is our batch composting. And that is where you just kind of throw things where, well, actually you don't throw things all in a pile right away. You kind of stockpile all your materials. You know, you might have your pile of grass clippings and your straw in one spot, then your pile of raw chicken manure in another spot. And then when you have enough of it built up, then you combine them together and then you into a pile. And you kind of do it all at one time. And that's a pretty fast way to go. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll notice there's a pile of chicken manure there and compost. And that's actually in my backyard right now. See, I've got a little piece of cardboard there against a chain link fence because I really didn't want it to, eat away at my chain link fence. So I put a little buffer of cardboard on the back there. And then I had my chicken manure in there. And then you can see my tubs that I've been stockpiling my dead straw and leaves in from last fall and throughout the summer when I pick them up in my backyard. And, I guess when I pluck weeds out of my garden, I will let them dry in the sun until they turn brown. And then I'll put them in the bin and then I'll make them into the pile. So you can kind of see that there. You can see my trusty, rusty potato fork there that I used to turn it when I end for making the pile. So that's batch composting. All right. So we talked over here, about the 3-pile or the 3-bin system. It's a good way to do it. You just kind of keep throwing it in the first one and then turning it and adding it to the next one as it gets full. Right. And you can also get a compost tumbler. You see them, they sell those commercially. It kind of looks like a 55-gallon oil drum, a 55-gallon metal barrel, but they're plastic. And it's got a little hole in it where you add your stuff. And then you kind of let the stuff sit in there. And then turning that is pretty simple because it's usually on rollers and you just kind of give it a couple of good turns every week or so. That'll help stir it up. And then you open up the little air deal on it so that way it can breathe because, you don't want it totally anaerobic. You want to have some aerobic breakdown in there happening as well. All right. And then finally, you can't forget about the cut and drop method. That's more for, weeds in your garden. You pull your weed out and then you just lay it along your vegetable plants that are in the garden. And it'll be a slow process, but it'll break down slowly and return those nutrients to the soil with help with the microorganisms. But also it'll help kind of serve as a little bit of a mulch and help keep those weeds from growing. And that really isn't easy to do with chicken manure because chicken manure is high in nitrogen. So if you top dress your garden with raw chicken manure, you want to do it very, very finely. Not much material at all. Think if a chicken was walking through there and foraging, the little droppings it would leave, that's what you might simulate if you had maybe a bucket full of chicken manure you're going to add straight to your garden. So I'm not here recommending, doing the cut and drop method with your chicken manure because that can burn your plants, give them a chemical burn. All right. So again, here's some more pictures of some compost piles. Somebody got really fancy and they put a bunch of cinder blocks there, and that's pretty nice because it holds the stuff in place really well and you don't have much spillage. However, it doesn't allow much breathing room around the sides or on the bottom, does it? Well, I guess on the bottom it isn't going to breathe much anyhow, now that I think about it. But, it really isn't going to breathe that much. So that means you just have to turn it more often. I don't know about you guys, but I get kind of busy with other stuff going on. I don't always have time to go out and turn my compost pile every week like it's recommended. But you should. If you want to get efficient at it, you're going to want to turn it at once a week. Maybe even more than that if you want. And the more you turn it, the more it's going to dry out. And then you just have to add some more water. Right? And then we already talked about the 3-bin pallet system. And then down below in the bottom left would be the batch system where you just kind of do it into a pile. And that works good. I know a lot of ranchers out in western South Dakota, like my dad in the cattle lot, after is done feeding his calves, he pushes all the cattle manure up into a pile, and there it sits until the pile gets too physically large to feed the calves around. Then he has to hire someone to come out and spread it into the field. And that's basically composting, but that's composting by accident, not really on purpose, And then in the bottom right corner, this person has a couple round bins made out of, hardware mesh. And that allows good air circulation. But to open that up, they probably have some clips on there. They have the wire tied together in a circle. You probably want to undo those clips. And then it all spills out. Then you just got to manually pitchfork it back in there. And that's how you turn that one. Works pretty good, I guess. But I wonder how flimsy that hardware mesh would be. It stays up pretty good there, but you might want to maybe put some posts in around it to kind of help support it upright. Right. So finished compost. Finished compost should look like rich brown or black soil, and it shouldn't smell bad. Think of when you dig a hole in the ground and you smell that soil. It kind of has an earthy aroma, and it's not an unpleasant aroma. In my opinion, it should smell healthy like nature. It shouldn't smell like rotten chicken manure. It shouldn't have any ammonia odor. It shouldn't burn your eyes or your nostrils or make you make you make you tear up a little bit, and it should be damp but not soaking wet. If it's too wet, it won't decompose in the rate that you want it to, and if it's too dry, well, it's kind of like hay, it doesn't decompose as fast. Okay, and finished compost will take 4 months up to a year, depending on all the different factors that are included. What materials are in it, how often you turn it, how wet you keep the pile, and how big the pile is. Generally, the bigger the pile, the quicker it'll decompose in the middle. But then the bigger the pile it is, the more of a challenge you have with turning it often, So, and if you ever wonder if your compost is ready to put on your garden or not, you're going to want to sit longer. It's not going to get any worse sitting longer. It's only going to get better. Kind of like, well, I guess I don't drink wine, but if we're a wine connoisseur, the longer it sits, the better it gets. So, right. Benefits of compost. So obviously we're interested in how to make compost, but it's good for you guys to understand also. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the benefits of composting. It increases your organic matter, in the soil, which helps with the water infiltration and the water holding ability, not to mention the nutrients. That's the biggest thing that we're after here, It holds the water in and makes the water available to plants because it increases your pore space in your soil too. Okay, and it buffers the pH of the soils and brings them closer to neutral. The closer to that 7 pH you have in your soil. 6.5, 7 is the optimal pH for most of our garden plants that we have. The closer you have to that, the better off your plants will grow, right? And then you want to reduce your dependency on synthetic fertilizers. Every time you have to go to Menards or your hardware store and buy a thing of Miracle-Gro to mix in with water and dump it on there, that's fine, and your plants respond well. But you're not making much healthier food because you're adding that extra inorganic fertilizer on there, and then in that fertilizer is very volatile. I guess your commercial fertilizer that you might purchase. So to make it less volatile, less explosive in the plant, they add salt to it, and salt in low amounts isn't going to hurt your garden, but after many applications of synthetic fertilizer, that will increase the salt content of your soil. And then if you don't have very good drainage, the salt levels will rise up in the soil and bloom at the top, turning a white, having a white powdery substance on the surface. And that's also detrimental to your plants. So, whereas you don't have that with your compost usually. So, and also, with soil health, we're all about the living soil and kind of supporting life too, because, everything in nature works together. That's kind of how it's designed anyways. So, it helps it increases the microbes in the soil. It also feeds them and gives them places to live, right? And, food scrap, and some interesting facts here. Food scraps and yard waste make up more than 30% of what we throw away in our household trash every day. So if you could save your food scraps and add them to your compost pile along with your chicken manure, it's going to save you a little bit in the garbage bill. And also won't fill up your garbage as fast, so we won't be taking it out as often. But also in my garbage, I know the things that get smelly and stinking there the most often are my food scraps, or my vegetable trimmings. So this way, if you're just throwing away paper and plastic materials, you won't have such a foul smelling garbage in your kitchen, right? And some of these compostable materials, they fill up these landfills and they add lots of methane gas to the atmosphere. So, and of course, methane gas is 25 times worse for global warming than CO2 is, carbon dioxide that we're exhaling all the time. All right, so let's talk about how to use our compost. Once we've done it all, you've taken the manure out of your chicken coop and either added it to your 3-bin system or your batch composting system in a pile. Once it's finished and it's nice and dark brown colored and has a nice pleasant odor to it, an earthy soil type odor, you're going to want to apply to 1/2 or 3/4 inch of that compost to the soil before you plant your seeds. Or you can use it as a mulch throughout the growing season as well. Just put it right on top. We don't want to be tilling it in, which you can, but that harms your microbes and all of your biology that lives in the soil that's helping break down this stuff and make that into a form that's available to plants. All right. So, and then if your compost is unfinished, you can use it directly on the plants, but it's going to have too many nutrients and release them all at once, and that can burn your plant. So you want to make sure it's finished or as close to being finished as you can. Okay. And then compost that's high in carbon, it'll tie up nitrogen in the soil, which means, there'll be nitrogen there, but it soaks up into the carbons and it's not available to the plants because the carbon has it soaked up. So you want to make sure your compost is finished before you add it to the garden. Otherwise, the browns, your straw and your wood shavings, they'll tie up that nitrogen into the, they'll tie up the nitrogen from the chicken manure into your straw and your wood shavings and won't be available to the plants. So then you'd be like, man, composting's a joke. My plants did not respond from using it until the next year when that stuff finally fully breaks down and the carbon breaks down enough to release the nitrogen. Then you'll see the benefit the following year. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of patience too. That's just farming and ranching and gardening. Sometimes if it doesn't work one way, give it another year, try it again. Maybe the stars will align for it to work out the next year. All right. And then your finished compost can be sifted and added to potting soil. So you don't want to start your seedlings in the house straight into compost. You're going to want to use that as an amendment to your other potting soil that you purchase to start your seedlings in. All right. So now, of course, with everything that people tell you what you should do, there's going to be people telling you that it won't work. And we're going to talk about some of those myths right now. Right? Some people say it's difficult, but really it's only as simple or difficult as you make it. If I was really eager about doing compost all the time and had lots of time to devote to turning my pile, I'd have a 3-bin system in my backyard and I would be out there turning it often and adding stuff to it and stuff. But that'd be pretty difficult for me with my lifestyle. I'm on the road a lot for work and helping my parents out at the ranch. So I like to keep it simple, with just a batch system. I kind of stockpile it all separately and then I add it together once. And then every couple weeks I'll go out there and turn it. I should do it every week, but like I said, I get busy, life happens, and you just don't get it turned all the time. And people say it smells bad. Well, yes, because you associate composting with decomposition, and decomposition generally has an unpleasant odor. But you probably have too much nitrogen. And so in our case today, you probably have too much chicken manure in your compost pile. And when you get that chicken manure wet, it's going to turn into the ammonia smell, and that's going to stink pretty bad. So you want to make sure you have lots of carbons into that pile too. So when I talked earlier about the deep litter method, we'll take a little break and talk about the deep litter method again. So in your chicken coop, you put your chicken bedding down, your straw or your wood shavings down, and then the chickens defecate on top of that. And then when they probably have a 1/2 inch of chicken manure in there, I'll go in and add another inch or two of straw or wood shavings. I like to use wood shavings because when the chicken manure lands on the straw and the straw is covering the thing evenly, when you go to clean it out finally, it's kind of like rebar and concrete. It's really hard to pick it up shovel by shovel because it all wants to stick together from the straw within it. So I like using wood shavings. So that's just a little plug there for I like to use wood shavings versus straw, although straw is cheaper for me and more accessible for me since I grew up on a ranch and a lot of my chickens are out at the ranch. I got ample access to straw from my dad. So anyhow, so if it's smelling bad, you're doing something wrong. Probably too many greens in it, too much nitrogen, right? And composting doesn't cost anything. You can get pallets for free most of the places. If you see a business with a bunch of pallets outside, you go ask them if they could, if your feed store has a bunch of pallets, you could ask them what they do with their pallets, and oftentimes they'll just give them to you. You don't have to go buy a $300 composting bin to make a little bit of compost in. You can even just a pile on the ground. As long as you've got some space, you can do it pretty cheaply, right? And now some people say compost attracts rodents, but if you keep your meat and your dairy products out of the compost, it won't be attracting the mice and stuff. You might have some like gophers that want to move in there because it's a nice place to house themselves and stuff. But if you turn it regularly, the disturbance should keep them away too. Basically it's your your dairy products and your meat products and even your food scraps. If you had spaghetti for dinner and decided not to eat it all and it got bad in the fridge, when you add your grain and stuff, your grain products to it, that's going to attract rodents as well, right? While we're talking about chickens, a lot of us have problems with mice in our chicken coops, and they say the best way to ward off the mice is to remove their food source. Well, if you have chickens, you always have food out for the chickens, and you have food in stockpile, and that's the mice love to eat that too. So that's hard to keep them, at bay from that, right? And then it takes a lot of space. Composting will take a little bit of space, but it all determines how much you want to compost at a time. And you can make multiple little piles if you don't have one big area for a larger pile to make your compost in. All right, that concludes my slideshow for the day. What questions do we have?
We have 2 questions. Carrie was wondering, is it
All right.
recommended to test the compost to be sure it's ready to use on the garden?
To test it? Yes. That is a good idea if you want to send it on to a soil lab somewhere and have them test it. And I'm not sure exactly what they test for, but they can test for if what the nutrient availability is in it for the plants and a plant available in a form that's available for the plants.
Okay. Brenda was wondering, are you able to make compost pile like this if you live in the city? Do you think there's any regulations?
That's a great question, Brenda. Now, I don't know what city you live in and what your ordinances are. I live in Fort Pierce, South Dakota, and from what I understand, I can have a compost pile in town here. And part of that might be if the neighbors don't get angry at me, but you'd have to call your city office and see what the regulations are for having a compost pile. The biggest advice I can give you for starting a compost pile, if you're concerned about neighbors or onlookers complaining about it, is maybe try to hide it. Put it kind of in a shady spot behind some bushes or somewhere, and make it not look like a pile of chicken manure in your backyard or dead decomposing plants. Maybe plant some tall flowers on the sides of it to kind of disclose it a little bit, or not disclose it, but kind of hide it from the public eye a little bit. So yeah, that'd be a city question for your city office. Great question. So otherwise, Brenda, another thing is you could have get one of those compost bins. People probably won't complain about a compost bin, and that's pretty well contained. It's all just in a canister, and a big canister, right? And then people won't see it, and they probably shouldn't smell it. So it should be another option there for you. Would be a compost bin.
Let's see. You must have wowed them with your brilliance because I'm not seeing any questions.
Are they sleeping? Maybe they're sleeping. Maybe you guys are out there sleeping on me.
Yep, seeing other questions. Wyatt, I'm going to type your email right here so they come up with one later.
Okay,
They can
yeah, that'd be great.
contact you. I saw that Chris, your cohort, will be speaking in Rapid City next Wednesday at the Pennington County Conservation Conference on composting mulch and no-till.
Yep, he will be. He helped me out with this presentation, in fact, so you'll get some of the same information, but a little different spin on it. And Chris also talked to you guys how to no-till your gardens and reduce tillage in your gardens. And Chris is a market gardener up by Aberdeen and does a great job, a fabulous job at that. And so, yep, he'll be up at the Conservation District meeting, and I might be there as well myself as an attendee. So if you guys have some questions you want to grill me about compost and chick manure, I'll likely be in Rapid City in person. You can grill me with your questions there and then.
Cool. Well, thank you, Wyatt, for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for the questions and for entertaining me here, entertaining my presentations.
Absolutely. This webinar has been funded under a conservation collaboration agreement between the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association to promote sustainable agriculture practices and environmental stewardship. Its contents are solely the responsibility of its authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the USDA or the NRCS. Again, my name is Melissa Niles. I am the Urban Ag Liaison with the South Dakota Specialty Producers. Visit us at sdspecialtyproducers.org for upcoming events. Find producers and become a member. Thank you, Wyatt.
Thank you.